subjects as it relates to climbing and mountaineering, and I would say even just adventuring or being athletic. And it's something I think it's getting more common for non-professional athletes to think about the impact of mental fitness and in terms of how it affects their performance, but it's still not super common. And I noted pretty early on in my career as a mountaineer that it really helped me differentiate myself. And I, especially early on, was usually the only woman on the team. And so I was looking for any little edge I could give myself to help me be not just a strong team member, but to make sure that I was, enjoying myself and achieving my goals in the mountains. And I found that being tough mentally made a big difference. So I wanted to share some of my insights. This is what we'll talk about today. And we'll have time for questions too at the end. So we'll talk about just what mental preparation means, some tips that I have used in the past. We'll talk about the importance of creating a good network to help support you as you're building your mental fitness. And then I'll share some of the things that for me, either personally or I have seen people sort of break or melt down in certain situations in the mountains that aren't that uncommon. So we'll talk about those just so you can be thinking ahead and preparing and come up with your own strategies. And then I'll talk about some of my favorite strategies. I'd love for those of you on the call to share those too. If there's some that have worked really well for you, let's make sure everybody hears about those. And then finally, we'll talk about what it's like to come back from a big climb, which I think is another one of those things that people don't often talk about. But it is really a big deal. And it can be pretty tough to come back, especially if you've spent a year planning for something and then it happens and then you come back home and there's often a big letdown associated with that. So let's get started with mental preparation. I think any book that you read about mental prep will coach you, and the athletes I work with, this is where we start to a good starting point for mental prep is to know your why. And that's kind of a common phrase we hear people say a lot now, know your why. And I would take it one step further. I've worked with athletes. I remember working with someone last year who was training for Everest, and she was like, I don't know. I just want to go do it. And so sometimes that's okay. Sometimes you just want to achieve this goal. You just want to be able to say that you summited Mount Whitney, and that is okay. So I want to totally encourage that it doesn't have to be this super deep thing, but very often it is. And so one of my tips for getting to that sort of deeper meaning is to keep asking why. So let's just say, and keep asking why until you kind of get this visceral feeling like, oh yeah, that's it. That's why I'm doing this. So let's say your goal is to climb Rainier next summer, and you sort of sit down with this and go through this exercise. And the first thing you might say is, I want to climb Rainier to see what I'm capable of. I want to know if I can do it. And then I would encourage you to ask why again. Why do you want to see what you're capable of? And maybe the answer there is because I used to be athletic and now I'm not anymore. And I want to get back into it. I want to start pushing my body again. And I would ask why again. Why was I athletic and now I'm not? And maybe your why there is because you spent the past 10 years having a family and taking care of them. And so I would ask why one more time. And then it might be because you want your kids to grow up to be strong, independent adults. And that, even when I don't have kids, but even just saying that as a reason for wanting to climb, I feel that. And so that would be the why. It starts with, I just want to see what I can do in the mountains. But the deeper reason and the thing that really hits you is that you want your kids to grow up to be strong, independent people. So the reason that's important, knowing your why, of course, is because when things get tough in the mountains, that's what you need to draw upon. That image of, in this case, your kids being strong, independent people. That reason, that rationale is often what can give you the push you need to keep going when things get difficult. And so I encourage athletes that I coach to get really intimate with that why. Don't just like, think about it and then let it go. Like, write it down, put a sticky note on your mirror, make it the backdrop of your phone, tell other people about it, using this example, tell your kids about it, like just really embody that. We'll talk a little bit about support systems, but often just saying to somebody, hey, I'm going to climb Rainier because it's important for me to make sure my kids are strong, independent people. That just putting it out there can make it very real for you. And I encourage people to do this like early on. Don't sit down and do this, as you're like packing your gear to fly to whatever country you're climbing in. Start thinking about this really early on, and also use it. Like, you can test it. So if you're on a long run and you're tired and you just want to quit 5 miles in, but your goal is to run 8 miles that day, like, test that why and see if it really works for you. And if it doesn't, maybe keep asking. And I want to go back to what I said in the beginning, and that is sometimes for people, it's okay they just want to climb because they love it and they love being outside, and that's okay. I encourage people though to like keep asking why and find that reason. And that's very often what will help you just push through difficult situations in the mountains. Also, mental preparation, I think, is about like having a mindset that is positive. That's a really big deal for me and my climbing partners. I like, things can get bad and it's okay to complain, but it's not okay to be whiny. I want you to be positive and able to adapt and to be resilient. And so there are, you can practice all of those things as you're training. Even if you live someplace where, you do most of your training in a gym, you can practice having a mindset that's positive, because there will certainly be days when you don't feel like working out, and you've got to just shift your mindset to like, this is why I'm doing this. I'm going to stay positive about this, and I'm going to make the most of this situation. And that over time allows you to adapt and to build resilience. So for me, it all starts with positivity. And that doesn't mean that you're like ignoring, the snowstorm that's coming, but you stay positive and you acknowledge what's going on around you and you learn to adapt to that. So last summer, I was mountain running with a friend, and it was kind of sketchy terrain. There was some risk and some exposure, and he had these super fancy La Sportiva shoes, and he bumped the BOA, which is, for those of you that aren't familiar with that lacing system, it's a mechanical lacing system that lets you dial the laces. Super cool, super fast to use, but he bumped it on a rock and the thing shattered into about 15 pieces and fell. And so it's the equivalent, if you haven't used those lacing systems, it's the equivalent of your shoelace breaking. And we were kind of effed in that situation because we were in sketchy terrain, and we worked through the situation because we were prepared. But had we not been prepared, it could have been pretty rough for him to descend without having really solid grippy footwear. And so we like assessed, we stopped, we stayed positive, we like accepted this is kind of risky situation that we're in, and what are our options here. So we first tried to look for the little pieces of the BOA, and we could not get them put back together. And then we just pulled all of our like safety gear that we had together, and between the two of us, we had duct tape and we had zip ties, and we made it work, and we actually continued to the summit and then came back down. So the important thing, and that go back to this again, is that we assessed and we stayed positive. And that is like a game changer for me in the mountains to, instead of like getting mad and getting like emotions wound up about the situation, which in my experience doesn't help anything, whether you're in the mountains or in real life. We focused on what we needed to do, looked at all of our resources, and were able to get through the situation. So I say all of that because every single day that you're training or that you're in the gym, in the mountains, getting ready for a climb is an opportunity to build your mental toughness and your mental fitness. So some of the other things that I have used in the past and that I encourage people to do are to, as you're getting ready for your climb, think about what it is that worries you or that scares you, or that, you watch a video and you're like, holy shit, I don't know how I will get through that situation. So really take some time to do this. Don't just be like, yeah, I don't want to get cold and move on. Like study it. Think about mental fitness as just, it's totally part of getting prepared for a climb. So today, because most climbs have been documented on YouTube or videos or blogs, a really easy way to do this is just to watch a video of your climb or talk to other people that have climbed it or read books about it and take note of those things that get your hackles up a little bit, make your stomach flutter a little bit, because those are the things that you want to focus on to build your mental toughness and your mental preparation before you go. So for me, and for a lot of people, before I went to Everest, I was sketched out about ladder crossings. It's not normal for us to be walking across a ladder that's extended over a giant crevasse that you can't see the bottom of. And even though I would say to myself, Lisa, you are just walking, like you are literally, like mechanically, all you're doing is putting one foot in front of the other. Your brain senses that there's something to be fearful of there, which is a totally normal response. And so I practice ladder crossings, and the climbers I coach who are prepping for Everest, they do this too. And even now, because unfortunately of climate change, there's ladders on Rainier for the past 3 or 4 seasons. So it's something you may need to practice even if you're climbing domestically. And I, first put the ladder just flat on the grass in my backyard and started walking on it. And then I put it on 2 5-gallon buckets. And then I practiced doing it in the dark. And then I leaned it a little bit. So I tried to simulate all of those things that I thought I would have to do when it mattered on the climb. And it did a few things. So it made me confident that I could do it. I also just tactically built techniques for being able to cross ladders. So if your feet are bigger, so men who have bigger feet, their crampons can actually extend or fill in the gap between the rungs of the ladder. They can put their front points on the rung in front and their heel will catch on the back. But for those of us with smaller feet, that does not work. And so I had to make a mental or visually see where on my boot I needed those. It wasn't my front points, it was the points right behind them, where I needed those points to land on the front rung in order to be balanced. And I actually knew exactly where in my boot that point was. And that let me do it much more easily when it mattered in the mountains. So that's a very practical example of how you can prepare. If it's something that's like I coached someone for Denali last year, and she was super worried about something that's very common that we'll talk a little bit more about, which is just being around negative energy. Like most of us climb on commercial expeditions. You don't know who your tent mate's going to be, who your teammates are going to be. And often I will say there's usually one jerk on the team, and guide companies now are being very good about trying to weed that out, but it just invariably seems like there's someone that just gets on your nerves. And that can be real. Not only is it frustrating, but it also saps your positivity, which we talked about. And it also just takes energy away from you that you don't need to be spending worrying about why that guy, is being such a jerk in the dining tent every night. So she was climbing Denali. She'd had bad experiences with men on a different climb. And she didn't, she wanted to do her best to avoid that situation. And so she came up with first she knew what her boundaries were. She knew this is what I'm willing to accept. This is what I'm not willing to accept. And if it crosses that line, I'm going to remove myself from the situation. I'm going to go sit in my tent or someplace quiet. I'm going to journal. I'm going to take care of me. And if I'm not someplace where I can remove myself from the situation, like if I'm actually climbing when this happens, she had breathing techniques that she used that would help her stay calm and focused. So those are sort of different examples, but the whole point is to think about what it is that worries you, watch videos, talk to people in order to come up with that list. And then I really am a big fan of writing. Write it down, think about it, and also write down or think or practice or have strategies for how you will overcome it. And the visualization piece is so important. I mean, we've probably all read studies about how people, I think there was like a study where people didn't know how to play the piano and they just visualized playing the piano and they could magically do it when it came time. Like our minds are so strong and so untapped. So visualize the scary situation and visualize yourself overcoming it and working through it with ease and with confidence, and make that a part of your visualization. I would say before a big climb every day. So to me, it's about knowing what it is that scares you, writing it down, coming up with a plan or a strategy to work through it, and then visualizing or practicing that very, very regularly. It's fitness, right? And we're so used to building up our bodies, and we, have regimented plans and processes and techniques for doing that. I think it's important to apply that same framework to getting strong mentally. And for me, this is a way that I've used to do that that's worked. Okay, more strategies. So we talked about how being both physical and mental. Someone told me this many years ago, and I don't remember who, but I love this quote, which is never pass up an opportunity to build mental toughness. So, if you like today, it's rainy in Seattle, I really don't want to go for a run this afternoon, but I'm going to, because doing that, not only does it just build up my tolerance for running in cold, wet conditions, but it also is a chance for me to like build my mental fitness. So don't pass up an opportunity to do that. I also like to say that, part of training is giving you the opportunity to be uncomfortable. And the more that you're uncomfortable now, when you're, in your comfortable home or when you're on your favorite trail, the more you're uncomfortable in that safe environment, the easier it will be to be uncomfortable in a more challenging environment. So don't pass up an opportunity. Run the extra mile, try a route that scares you, do it, of course, in a safe environment, but continue to just push yourself, and you will notice that bit by bit, again, staying positive, that your resilience starts to increase. I also really am a big fan of setting some intermediate goals. So I have, people who haven't climbed extensively, and their goal maybe is to climb in the Himalaya. And so they will, and guide companies will generally encourage this too, they will set some sort of intermediate goal, maybe of climbing in Ecuador or climbing in Mexico, not just to like test how their bodies perform at elevation to get their gear dialed, but that's also a chance to build some confidence. So if you want to climb Everest, you haven't ever climbed a mountain that big before, setting one of those intermediate goals helps to build your mental toughness and your confidence that you can take on something bigger. And then I'm a huge, huge fan, not just when I'm climbing, but just in my life, of using mantras and visualizations. Mantras are just short phrases that you really connect with. I don't like to use someone else's unless it means a lot to me. It has to hit you. And so for me, when I'm climbing, if things get difficult, I will just repeat, I am strong, and I will use it in sync with the movements of my body, so that if I'm, moving my right foot, I will say the words I am. And when I move my left foot, I will say the word strong. And those mantras have a way of quieting or dampening the negativity that can start to just play over and over again in our minds, and shutting that negativity off, which doesn't mean discounting dangerous or situations around you that you need to pay attention and react to, but it's like the replay of, man, I'm slower than everybody else, I suck at this, why am I doing this, I'm slow, everyone else is faster than me. this backpack's so heavy. Like you can't change those things in that moment. And that negative reel that starts to loop is not helping you at all. So being able to like flip it to something positive, it will quiet that negativity and put just a different story in your head. So I like to say, I am strong. Find what works for you, whatever that is. And it could, going back to your why, it could be that you say, like if you're really dedicating your climb to someone, you say that person's name over and over again, or attaching it to that why, I think makes it even more potent. And then visualizations. So huge fan of this, not just for climbing, but in everyday life. There's so much benefit to just being quiet and thinking through a situation, and do it with all your senses. So like, think through it mentally, think about what it's going to feel like to be standing on the summit. Think about, the wind, what it's going to smell like, what you're going to be wearing. All of those things make that much, much more real for you. And so visualizing, I encourage people to start doing early, and sort of just like physical training, like build up. And I will even put it, for some people who are really into it or need a little nudge, I will put it in Training Peaks, which is the program I use to coach people. I'll like assign it to them so that each day for 5 minutes, like it's 5 minutes, you just sit down in a quiet space and get comfortable and think through standing on the summit, think through overcoming those obstacles with ease. All of those things are going to help you build your mental strength for when it really matters. So moving on then to having a good support system. This I think is overlooked a lot, and I'm totally guilty of this. And having a group of people that you really rely on, that like your friends that you could go to with like the worst situation, and they're not going to judge you, and they're going to love and support you no matter what. This is what I mean by a support system. It's not like the guy at the office that's curious about what your next climb is. This is that like really cherished group of people that you share your deepest, sometimes darkest concerns or thoughts with. And it's okay. They're going to help you through that. So before I was going to climb K2, I didn't want to tell anybody, because I didn't want the pressure. I didn't want people to know. I didn't want to be judged. And so I kept it to myself for a couple years. And then when things were getting serious and like it was finally going to happen, I started sharing it with my like closest friends, just non-mountain girlfriends who didn't really get it, but I like just needed to share with them. And I shared it with one other girlfriend that's also a climber. And she and I really I was able to just share all of my concerns, all the things that I was going through with her. And it helped so, so much to have that just network and that support as I was going through things and preparing. And so it's important for that network, I think, to share not just your wins, which we all, that's the easy part, but to share what you're concerned about, what's scaring you, what you failed at, what you regret. Like just being able to get all that out there in a supportive way is super helpful. And it holds you a little bit accountable too. Like I have other friends in my business, girlfriends that were like business friends, and we hold each other accountable every week for things that we're all doing to grow our businesses. So accountability is a big deal. I also like the idea of putting your team sort of on call. So that doesn't necessarily, that can obviously can be when you're climbing, but it can also be when you're preparing. So think about having people there that like, I just don't want to go on this run today. Can I just, I'm not sure what's up. Can I chat with you? And like, or text or whatever. That little motivation can make a big difference. I have taken many, many, sometimes tearful phone calls from base camps in the Himalaya, from climbers who just needed like a pep talk or someone to talk to, or someone to like, strategize a little bit about with. So having that network, it's so important, and it helps to build confidence and accountability, and I think can really be a differentiator. So let's talk about not great things then. So these are some like breaking points. And these are things that I have either experienced or I've seen trigger other people. The first, and I think, I don't know if these are exactly how I would say, like in terms of priority, but this is probably the most common, which is basically you're not taking care of yourself. So fatigue, dehydration, hunger obviously can affect how you make decisions on the mountain. So all of those things create this sort of mental fatigue. If you're climbing at elevation, being hypoxic also adds to not thinking clearly, and I think shortens the distance between where you're at and where that breaking point is. They can affect how you make decisions. And it's an important, this is a good reminder for me. I was actually climbing, for those of you that are in Seattle, I was climbing Guy Peak a few weeks ago with a girlfriend. And we got kind of frazzled in the beginning because there was this just jerky guy at the base of the climb, sort of questioning why we were out there. And of course, as women, we took that very seriously. And my friend's a mountain guide, so like we knew what we were doing. And we chose to take a slightly different route so we could avoid this guy. And like going back to just removing yourself from the situation, that's what we chose to do. We're just going to take a little detour. And that detour got more technical than we thought it was going to be. And the day got longer than we expected. And so at one point, she actually said, I like realized, I'm like, man, I think I'm like dehydrated here. And she turned to me and she was like, I think I need to take a little break. Like I'm, just a little dehydrated. I need to eat. I'm not thinking as clearly as I want to be. And so communication is just so, so critical. And that the precursor to communication is knowing yourself and knowing your partner or your teammates. And so knowing yourself is fundamental, I would say, to success in the mountains. And often you only get that relationship with yourself by being in challenging situations. And those challenging situations don't only have to occur in the mountains. They could be difficult hikes as well, or difficult training runs, or difficult gym workouts. So getting to know, like, this is what it feels like when I feel a little mentally compromised because I'm dehydrated. And then being able to just honestly communicate that with partners is like it's what will keep you alive in the mountains. So being aware, communicating, super important. As partners, I think it's important to have a partner that you can say like, hey, just checking in, like, I haven't seen you eat anything in an hour. Are you feeling okay? And for them to not, take offense at that, to realize that that's coming from a place of concern and wanting to keep the whole team safe. But I think being a good partner, that's part of being a good partner, is asking questions and communicating. Lack of communication. So I, and many of you on this call, have probably read a bazillion mountaineering books. I have a whole bookcase of them in my house. And I used to really study them when I was starting out as a new climber. And very, very often to me, the breakdown seemed to be a lack of communication, which was very often tied to not having clear roles and responsibilities on the mountain. And clear doesn't just mean like you're the leader. Clear means we all agree, like everyone's on board with that person being the leader. There's no animosity, there's no concern. And if there is, it has to be talked about ahead of time. So last fall, actually almost exactly a year ago, I'm missing it. I organized an all women's climb with a girlfriend to Nepal. We climbed this beautiful mountain called Cholatsi. And this was the first time, like, it was just us, just a group of friends climbing. And so we sat down and we got to Kathmandu with our, like, the Sherpa team and everybody. And it was very important to me that we said, who is the leader of this organization, of this climb? And what does that mean to each of you? And luckily, things went very smoothly. There wasn't any need to sort of, enact like anything like serious. But knowing that, like, I was the leader of that climb, Pasang was making technical decisions about when and how we would climb on the mountain, and what she said went and what I said went. And there was like, we would talk about it and we would discuss it, but it was ultimately our decisions. for how that climb went. And that, again, we didn't need to like test that, but I think is so important. Even if you're climbing, like I said, on, a simple local climb with a girlfriend, I think it's important to establish those responsibilities so that if things get serious, you already know who's going to be responsible for what. Other situations that I've seen derail people, a big one is also lack of confidence. And this for me as a coach is heartbreaking, really is, when I know that someone is physically capable of a climb and they don't believe it themselves. And that's one of the hardest jobs for me as a coach, is to try to convince them that they're able to do it. I coached a woman last year who was climbing Rainier, and it was her second attempt, and she just couldn't get past like being concerned that she wasn't ready. And it affected her on the mountain. And I hate that. So building confidence again by going back to having intermediate goals, working with a coach, sharing what your concerns are, all of those things will help to build your confidence in the mountains when it matters. Another thing I've probably all seen this happen is exposure. So just physically like looking down and thinking, holy cow, there's like a mile of free air beneath me, can really get to people. And the people that I work with who first, it's important going back to knowing yourself to acknowledge like this scares me and this is something I need to work through to be safe in the mountains. I'm coaching someone now who we're working through this, and I'm having him he lives in Seattle, so I'm having him do just little, like we're just turning the knob a little bit. Like we're just, he's doing some easy scrambles and then a little harder scrambles, and then going back to like the climb where he originally was like getting wigged out about exposure. So do it gradually in a safe environment. This is, a great opportunity to work with friends or people who've maybe got a little more experience than you in the mountains, and you can share like, hey, I'm trying to, build up my tolerance to be in an exposed situation on a mountain, and they can help you navigate that as well. I'm going to switch to the next slide because it's related to intense situations. So obviously things can go unexpectedly wrong, right? This is, climbing is dangerous no matter how much we have practiced and visualized and communicated and taken care of ourselves. Things don't always go smoothly in the mountains. Very recently there were 2 American women killed on Shishapangma in avalanches. And I happen to have a friend who's there with them, and she and I have been talking a lot over the past few days about what that's been like. And my advice and what I've seen work is to first know your boundaries and make sure that you are safe in that situation, and then to communicate what's going on and let that, sort of chain of command work itself out. I will also say in those rescue / tense situations, taking care of yourself is so critical. The first rescue that I was involved in happened on Aconcagua, and we had to carry someone down from like 22,000 feet, and it took, 6 or 8 hours to do that. And when we finally got her to camp, I realized I had not eaten or drank that entire time, which is not taking care of myself. So this is going back to what I said earlier, all about knowing yourself and your needs and communicating those and making sure that you're safe and that you're taking care of yourself if you're in an accident situation. If things aren't quite that intense, so going back to team dynamics, know what your boundaries are. I think that's absolutely number one. Say something, get yourself out of that situation if it's unhealthy and if it's sapping your energy. When I'm climbing, I sort of think about like, I have this finite amount of energy today. This is all I got. And what do I want to use that energy on? And it certainly is not getting all spun up about something that a teammate's doing that's annoying me. It's instead needs to be focused on keeping myself safe and taking care of myself. And all of that mental prep will absolutely pay off. So I wanted to share too some summit night rituals. These are things that I do if I'm climbing on a big mountain. The first one is sort of silly, but somebody told me a long time ago that new socks are warmer than socks that have been worn because the socks that have been worn still have oil from your feet in them. I don't know if that's true, but I know that brand new socks feel really, really good when you've not worn clean clothes for 2 months. So I always carry with me a new pair of socks, and I put those on before, like the night before when I'm getting ready to go to the summit. I always change my headlamp batteries. Those of you that know me know that I've had some rough situations with headlamps, even with new batteries, but I always just make sure that I put fresh ones in before I head out for the summit. I also like to stuff my pockets with snacks. Those of you that know me also know how much I like snacks. So I make sure that they're in my down suit. They're in my, like, if I'm not wearing a down suit, they're in the pockets of my parka, so that when I stop for a break, I throw that parka on. I have all those snacks just like in my pockets ready to go. So that's another thing that I make sure of before I head to the summit. I like to visualize the route. Think about, if I've been studying it now for months. I know what the next several hours are going to be like. And I like to just like lay in my tent and think through what that's going to be like and visualize myself going through it in a safe, efficient way. Before a really big climb, I force my friends to write notes to me, like letters or sometimes like audio notes to me, and I'll have those on my phone. And they can be super emotional, even though at the time they might have been funny when they made them or goofy. Listening to those just puts me in a really positive mindset. And it helps me think too about, I have all these people that have helped me and like they're rooting for me, even though they're not exactly right here for me in this moment. So I like to listen to those as well before I start to climb. And then for big climbs, I will write a letter to myself. And this is something I encourage athletes to do as well. And that letter should be written to you, like from the perspective of you've already accomplished this goal. And what do you want to say to yourself as a result of accomplishing that goal? Sometimes I'll just say, like, these are the things I've overcome in my life already. And so this is just one more thing that I will overcome. And that can be super, super powerful. And I always put that letter like in the pocket of my down suit, just in case like I'm having a tough moment and I can just remember or like pat or like recall that it's there and what those words are. And then I like to, this is going back to like being prepped mentally, I like to create like a bubble. Like, if you think about people like, I don't know, before they go on stage or like Olympic athletes, like they get in this zone, they listen to music, they're like, no distractions, I'm not looking at my phone anymore. Like I got all this like perfectness, preparation, mental strength, and I don't want anything or anybody that's gonna interact with that in a negative way. So I like to think of myself as just being in a little bubble, and that could mean that you like, listen to music too, or just do something to even physically like create a little barrier between you and the people around you. Not that you're going to be like a nasty teammate, but just most people will respect that, like, hey, I'm like getting ready mentally for this, and can we chat about that later? So those are my summit night rituals. And then I want to make sure we have time for questions, but re-entry. So this is such a big deal. And I remember feeling this for the first time. I climbed Denali, and so it was summer, and that was like the first really big mountain that I climbed and that I really had to train for, because, as a woman, carrying that weight was super, super difficult. And so I'd spent 6 or 9 months preparing and being like kind of myopic about getting ready for this climb. And then I summited and I came back and it was summer. And I remember being at the lake with my friends, and they were like talking about what was on TV or like talking about celebrity relationships. And I was like, what? Like, how is this important? And that was the first time I realized that I was just like, I had this sense of letdown and this sense of like being separated from my normal life. So the important thing is that you acknowledge that that's going on. And some of those symptoms can be that you're just like lackadaisical, you're fatigued, maybe sad, emotionally on edge or depleted. And often it feels like everything else around you, like that situation at the lake with my friends, everything around you just seems like it doesn't matter, or it's boring or mundane, or like it just doesn't get you excited anymore. So, and in all seriousness, that can even for some people trigger depression. So it's important to know that it's a serious thing and to get help if you need it. I think just acknowledging what's going on and realizing that it's totally normal. This is just the situation that I'm in right now. And having friends. So going back to that one girlfriend that I talked to K2 about, she and I still have this agreement that like we can call each other and we get it. It's kind of hard, I think, to explain to someone who hasn't really been in an extreme environment or pushed themselves in the mountains. I think it's kind of hard to explain how you're feeling and what's going on. I just think they have a hard time, and that's true for spouses and partners. They have a hard time getting it sometimes. So having that support network or a coach or someone that you can just talk to totally transparently can really help you kind of lift that fog. I think practices like journaling and meditating can be super helpful. I always encourage people to just get out and move your body, like do yoga, go for a fun run, go for an easy ride, like whatever the things are that are going to make you feel good and kind of lift your spirits again. When the few articles that exist about this encourage people also to set another goal. And I'm a little bit not as, I don't think that's a horrible idea, but for me, sometimes if I set a new goal, I put all of my energy into preparing for that new goal. And I don't instead take the time to like work through how I'm feeling about the goal that I just accomplished or didn't accomplish. So I think setting a new goal is good, but I think it shouldn't be done at the detriment of like feeling what you're feeling right now. And then another important thing is to protect your story. So like you just had this incredible experience that most people can't understand, won't have. And people at work or at church or at your yoga studio are going to want to know what it was like. That's totally normal and natural. And that doesn't mean that you have to share it with them. You come back and everyone's supportive and excited, and it's okay to say like, yeah, it was an amazing experience and I'm still kind of working through it, and I'd love to talk to you about it later. I think it's important that you share when you're ready and only what you're ready to share, and to sort of keep that story to yourself until that feels right. So those are our topics for today. I want to end before we get to questions with some resources, and I will send this slide deck out so you have them. These are some books that I have read. This is a study about letdown. It's a great Harvard Business Review anthology of different mental toughness stories. And I didn't mention it when I was speaking, but I also really love the podcast, The Sharp End. Fantastic podcast about climbing and accidents. And the beauty of it is that it's so simple. The host she has people come on and tell their story, and they talk about what they've learned as a result of that accident that occurred in the mountains. And for me, that's a great way to learn, and there's always little things I pick up and like, oh yeah, I should really always keep a pair of puffy pants in my backpack, even if it's summer out, just so you never know what the weather's going to do. So I'll add that to the list. But yeah, let's see if anybody has any questions. We can take a few minutes for those. Otherwise, we can call it a day. I guess if you have a question, raise your hand. Or you can just unmute yourself and start talking too. We'll make it easy. Okay. No questions.
I just want to, say to you, sorry that, like when I get on was like a couple minutes late. It's always when you're, like getting in the Zoom and it decides to upgrade.
Oh, I hate that.
Yeah.
No worries, Vivian.
I really appreciate, and as a matter of fact, I just, like last month, like I had attempt to summit Mont Blanc, and we turned around, with at doom digger, and it was interesting. Like every single thing you mentioned, like I could relate, and I was just like getting excited, saying that, hey, the preparation, I sped up, I thought a lot, and I didn't, like plan the exact date till about 10 days ago. And it's just because I was gonna be in Europe, since I had like,
Okay.
like another marathon, I was thinking about all the way from San Diego to there. And yeah, maybe I could fit in since the season didn't end yet. So
Right.
yeah, it was interesting. I really appreciate, like all your points, and it's just so systematic, and it's a great playbook for anything,
Thank
like
you.
big goals for life. Yeah, really appreciate
I love that word playbook. I'm going to use that. Thanks, Vivian.
it.
I hope Mont Blanc works out for you in the future.
You know what? Definitely I'll try again. Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else have anything they want to share? Okay. Well, we will call it a day. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you've all learned some things. Please share this with other friends. Like there's no reason to keep it a secret. The stronger we all are out there, the stronger our community is overall. And if you have questions afterwards, please reach out to me. I'll send out just a quick survey. I just want to know if there's any other topics that you'd like to talk about on upcoming webinars. So please send me that feedback, or if there's other questions or things you want to chat about, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa.
Bye.
Bye.